Hello and welcome back to Just About Managing podcast. This week we have a Olympics doubleheader for you. We're going to kick off shortly with conversation on managing high performance and the whole link between, I guess, that in a context of sport and into the work environment. And we're very lucky to have our sports science expert, Mr. Lee Smith, to guide us through that conversation. Chris and I are going to be willing bystanders in that conversation. And then second half, just a little bit of reflection on what we've seen and loved on the Olympics over the last week and how that's impacted us. So without further ado, here we go. High performance. And it's funny, I chose the subject this week, and this came to me almost instantly after the back of our last episode talking about our reflections on the Olympics. And it is interesting, I think, as you get to this time of year, and when you've got so much sport on TV in our household, the conversations tend to revolve around that as well. And some of my kind of reflections from that conversation, we've been talking about sports and athletes and what types of individuals and physiques and how do people get drawn to certain sports. And that started triggering me as well in terms of individual pursuit versus team pursuit. And there's so many different contexts and guises to that. And then actually, that context of you as an individual in your career, and then you working as part of a team and being a manager of a team, and that kind of the unlocking of that performance. So that was my huge mind dump. But I'll hand over to Lee Smith, the expert now. He'll talk for the rest of the podcast, and Chris and I will sod nage sagely, and then we go on to the second half.
Well, I was looking around for the sports science expert, John, when you were leading there. Who the hell have we got on board? Have we got a guest speaker again? Do you know what? It's really interesting. I knew what the topic was, but I'd not sort of overly prepared or overly thought about it. But I've just been to the driving range, so I've got a bit of a freer day today. So I've been to the driving range, and you were pleased to know the balls were flying all over the place. Not many of them
in a direction that you wanted.
No,
5% of the time.
Yeah, at least, maximum 5% of the time, I think. And I've only been a couple of times in the last year or so, and it's just sort of dusting off the clubs and getting rid of the mice bites out of my golf shoes and various things. And at the driving range, it's moved on a lot since I was last there. So they've got an electronic board at the back that has got a ball tracker, so it tells you how far you've hit it, how far it's sliced, how far it's hooked. If it's completely disappeared off the radar and is now being tracked somewhere else, which mine was most of the time. And anyway, I'm stood at the driving range, and in the bay next to me is a guy I know from my football days from playing, and he's with his son. And as I'm sort of hitting this ball as straight as I can do, next to me in the driving range, I'm just hearing this, that lovely sound for those that play golf when it's a swoosh of a driver and then the ping as it fires off the club. And it is the perfect ping. And this ball is just rocketing off the tee down through the fairway. And as I turn around and look at the score at the board behind, it just says in big letters, out of bounds, because he's hit it too far. And it's this young lad, it's this guy's son who's 18. And I said, how far are you hitting this? And he said, about 330, 340. Wow. And I'm like, what the hell? And it's perfectly straight. And his dad says, well, it should be. It's his life. And I said, well, are you the golf pro here then now? Is that what you're doing? He says, no, he's got a scholarship at a US university. So he's playing golf in the US while he's studying sports and exercise science, funnily enough, as well. And And one of the things we talked about there, and we had a great conversation with him, just digging into how he'd got into it, what he was doing, and that one of the key pieces we talked about there when he was mentioning it was he's in this sort of new elite group now where he was winning local competitions in the UK. He was playing for Nottinghamshire, etc. Gone over there and now he's one of many that are in this great level, and he's having to find his feet. And we talked about the mentality of that in a way as well. So we got into the sort of sports psychology and a little bit like they talked about in British cycling in the past, the sort of marginal gains in there that you're aiming for all the time. But one of the things his dad said, and this feeds back into then that high performance from a work perspective as well at times, I feel, is his dad said, he said, when I go and watch him play golf now in a competition, one thing I've noticed is that when he's lining up to take a shot, when he's walking between holes, I can't tell unless I've watched this whole round, I can't tell now whether he's having a good round or a bad round because his mentality is always the same. So if he's hit a double bogey on the last hole, he's still just focused on the next shot.
Yeah.
And the next shot. If somebody's 6 shots ahead of him or 6 shots behind him, it doesn't change how he approaches that next shot. And that was it's really interesting to hear that. We hear it talked about a lot in the thing of control the controllables and focus on what you can do. And it did, again, it's a different in the business world, I think, for personal high performance. But I think there is that same mentality of actually not trying to shut out the noise around you because it's always going to be there, be aware of it. But just think about that, controlling the controllables again. What can I do better? We all make mistakes at work. I made a hell of a lot. But how do you just focus on just continuing to improve, just continuing to look at that next piece that you're doing, that next bit of work that you're on, and then those links in there.
And so often I think people in the work environment, there's times, and we've all been there, you almost lose your way because your work becomes so focused and intense that you lose that. Whilst you're very driven from a work ethic perspective and dedicated, you almost get so into the zone that you lose that personal attention to yourself in terms of your own self-development and where am I going next? And you almost end up working literally for the company and not for yourself. And that's detriment to all of us. And there's a fine balance between those two. But I think that's it's a salutary reminder to that.
Completely. I think the other piece on that note, I think, John, as well, is that it's a reminder of that, but also that reminder of actually it doesn't matter what those around you are doing. Focus on what you're doing and what you can do well and how you can improve. As he talked about in the golf, it doesn't matter where somebody else is shooting, having the round of their life and 6 shots ahead. That doesn't change how you play your next shot.
Yeah.
And I think that's, in the work environment we see at times, and I've felt it myself, when you look around and you see what others are doing or how they're performing or what they've done right or what they've done wrong or why am I not in that position? I think it's that piece of, and actually you can only, back to control the controllables, you can control what's in front of you and what you're doing. And how do you keep yourself on that level mentality, if you like, to keep that continuous improvement, continuous progression in there?
Yeah. Did you get him to sign the Stephen Covey Habits book when you were there? It's like massively back to that, isn't it? Like circle of influence, circle of concern. God, that must be so difficult as like a teenager. In a really competitive sport like golf, the margins are really small. Point whatever percent away from the perfect strike. It must be really, really difficult. So to hear that somebody's able to get that level of focus in that sport that's very, very individual, right? Fascinating. Sports psychology. I mean, that's come a long, long way. Yeah. And there's a lot of like safe space and like reflecting on like what you should be doing. So there's the knowledge, right? The knowledge of like how you should do it. But then there's a lot of like reflection, reflection and safe space to talk about this stuff. I think, when it comes to, corporate world and whatever it may be, that safer space to then work through this, to grow that mentality, that's quite rare.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's quite a lot of courses to teach you, oh, well, you should be doing this or should be doing that. But that safe space is quite interesting.
Can I just add a little bit into that safe space,
definitely.
Chris? Before you kind of you don't use it while you're doing your umming. I think from the number of my clients I've coached with or mentored, that safe space is, I think, in the work environment, because we don't have that same level of focus you would in terms of you're high performing as a sports person, is that often people have this switch, which is I'm at work or I'm at home. And that concept of self-reflection, it's almost like this internal mental safe space of actually, well, that was a shit day. Well, why was it? How do I change it? A lot of people in the work environment aren't encouraged to create that as part of their habit and routine. And to me, that's, in some ways, it goes back to the Craig Preston conversation, which is in the corporate world, we don't train managers or leaders really. We put them in a job, and then we might give some training afterwards, and we expect them to get on with it. And I think there's one of those core tools as a manager and a leader, importantly, applies to everyone in the work environment, is that concept of reflection. And that's almost that safe space inside yourself in terms of criticism, but also, even better if. But yeah, sorry, Chris, I interrupted you. I just wanted to add that in.
No, that's good, right? I think the lens that you put on when you think about performance, or I think your original question here, John, was around performance in like teams or performance at work. And if you ask that question, a lot of people talk about the immediate team they're in, and you kind of grow into maybe like a triangle, like a hierarchy.
Yeah.
So if you're the manager, you think about the role you have, and you think about the people in your team and the relative skill sets and diversity and releasing that and all that kind of like good stuff. So we've got this thing where we're in like this kind of like piece of the organization, a bit like a piece of cheese or pie, right? But it's quite narrow, right? It can be quite tasty, quite rewarding, but it's narrow, right? And actually, an organization or a firm, whatever it is, an adventure is much bigger than that. So if you think about this in a different way, maybe put yourself at the center of something a lot bigger, like a circle, a really big circle. Your team's huge. The team you're in, it's not your team. You have a role in a team that's much bigger than the organizational construct you're in. So there is, yes, everybody in your piece of cheese that might report to you or whatever, and there's all of the people more senior than you, right? All the way up to the top of the cheese, right? And then there's all of the other support functions, whether that be technology, communications, and things like that. And there's all the other partners you've got across the organization in similar business lines to yourself, but also in like HR and L&D everywhere. So that means there's huge opportunity, right, to take a completely different lens on what high performance in teams is. You're only part of, you're like the steward of this team trying to create high performance, right? But it's not yours. You've just got a role in that team, and it's about getting the maximum out of it. So if it makes sense to partner up with other people in other bits of the organization, to get over yourself and ask for more help, and just to create this kind of, get more senior people to help everybody in the team to kind of see what's going on and what's possible, get that buy-in, and then all those voices, all that diversity below you. So I think it's really interesting. There's this kind of, self-reflection that it must be you. You need to think about it yourself. But actually, the more you involve the rest of the organization, the more powerful the performance will be.
Yeah.
So I think getting out of your own way to enable the whole team to like perform better. Yeah. And it sounds weird, but there's so much more than that little piece of cheese.
Yeah. That's a fantastic point. I'm just deciding which piece of cheese it is and what type of cheese it is, Chris. But,
I'm going for the whole wheel.
The whole wheel.
Yeah.
Whole enchilada.
But I think it's a brilliant point, Chris, next. I know I've talked before about some of the work that we do with Canis. They talk about effectiveness, the power of team, and how do you make every part of that team make everybody better. But I think expanding that to your point, Chris, like I say, we can focus on ourselves, we can focus on our team, or we can focus on the bigger being that we're part of. And when you talk about that effectiveness, the power of the team, how does everybody in the team make themselves better or make each other better? But how does every team make every other team better? Then you're starting to get into real high performance of an organisation, I think, in there. And one of the bits we did quite a bit of work on actually in our space in markets technology actually in HSBC. And I've sort of drilled into a little more since coming out as well. Goes back to your point around that safe space internally, as you talked about, John. But going back to your piece then, Chris, on the teams piece, there was I don't know if you've seen, there was a study done at Google about high-performing teams in Google called the Aristotle study. And it was saying what makes their teams high-performing. And it didn't come out with what they expected at all. And there's a lady called Amy Edmondson that does a lot of work on this now as well. So she's very, very famous, and it's getting a lot more momentum, thankfully. And they looked at it of going, is it putting the best people together? Is it putting people co-located? Is it getting people together that just like each other and so they're friends with each other? And the one factor that came out of there that said this is what is the crux of high-performing teams was psychological safety in there. And that psychological safety is not in an environment where everyone puts their arms around each other and says everything's fine, we're going to be good, it's all friendly. It's that ability to bring yourself to work so that you feel completely yourself, you feel empowered, you can challenge, you can ask questions, you can speak up if you need to or want to. But also that ability to, we've talked about it before, freedom to make mistakes or safety to make mistakes and the empowerment in there, but to also challenge in every direction. So challenge your peers, ask questions, challenge your leadership, but not with a challenge of, this is wrong, but a real constructive approach in there and a constructive challenge. And I think it links back then to, again, it's got similar vague sort of link in them with Lencioni's sort of 5 dysfunctions of a team he talks about as well, where the base of that for high performance is trust again, and trust within that team. I think that's not the be all and end all, but I think without that, it's difficult then to get you into true high performance.
And I think your point around that whole psychological safety is often people believe that psychological safety is only between the managers and the employees, but it's going back to Chris's big wheel of cheese. It's actually everyone within that organization feeling that psychological safety. I think, yes, you as a manager can work hard to understand, what makes your staff tick, what do they excel, what their interests. But actually, if that's just a bilateral relationship, so I firmly believe there's that need for not only for you to understand, but that for your teams to understand and appreciate each other as well. And that's in some ways is a harder gig than just just coming into a role yourself and trying to achieve that.
Yeah. I mean, collectively, the whole organisation needs to help set the why and feel part of it, right? Rather than it just be like one person and kind of like top down, So, I mean, if you think about the Koreans and there was a big archery thing in the Olympics this week, right? And there was a perfect bullseye right in the middle, and that shape always reminds me of the Simon Sinek shape related to like leadership, right? With like the why in the middle and then the how and the what. All right. So that interaction between management of making sure what gets done and how it gets, what needs to be achieved and how it gets done. And then collectively, though, the power, to have more people firing for more bullseyes is to spend time, not just from the leadership, as you've said there, John, right? Yeah, correctly. Not just the leaders, but everybody in the organisation being able to have a voice, to be able to call out why they're at work, what's in it for them, and what really makes them tick. Yeah, so that is hugely important. And then people will fire their own arrows at the target and make them up themselves, and not like pinging golf balls everywhere or arrows everywhere, but like straight down the middle. They've got the ability to do it themselves because they feel empowered, feel safe, and feel supported to do that. So that's like a big, big topic, and that takes time, right? And it takes concerted effort, and it can start at the top. It can start from anywhere. So this is all around, like, leadership isn't necessarily someone with the title, right? So the only person who tells you that you can't really do anything is actually yourself. It's in your head, right? So overcoming that inner critic, that doubt, you can go and have a conversation with anyone around the target state of the climate or the client base or the organization and where you're going, actually being part of that, being brave and being out there and asking those questions. So, you know, even the law of diffusion of innovation, the people who are like skilled in this stuff, what's interesting is a lot of the pioneers who are really good at communicating it, how they feel and what's in it for them and all that stuff, are going to be the more younger people in the organization. This isn't determined by like tenure or grade. Yeah, so that's another reason why it's no one person's particular team, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's huge. It's just a massive opportunity to create more channels, to create more feedback as fuel for the team, for the organization to create that high performance. And then importantly, Lee, like when there is something that's wrong, it's got to be acted upon and course corrected, and kind of like, the culture there, coming back to like Craig the other week, right? You got to kind of like do all of this as you go. It's not like a perfect thing. You can't just like get the recipe out and stick it all in the pie, and the cheese pie tastes fantastic. It doesn't work. It's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's within that, and that's where you tie back into that whole world of incremental gains as well, isn't it? It's not your one and done. It's that constant evolution, and challenging and adapting to it.
Completely. I think the other bit I just touched on at the end is that, again, going back to the leader, the part they play in there, I think, is living that as well. And therefore, I think Craig made that point again, that leadership is example. And so it is living that and living that psychological safety, living that continuous improvement, living those marginal gains, living that environment where you're open to challenge and criticism or thought process of others. And jump on, Chris, where people are raising every part of that team or that piece of cheese again, are raising those opportunities or difficulties they're facing or problems so that they can then be resolved, be taken, and be improved upon.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's a really underrated thing here, right? So we can have the most amazing strategy conversations.
Yeah.
Right. This is how it should work. Here's all the theories. Here's the books. Here's Cynic. Here is the trust equation. Here's XYZ. But strategy on its own is relatively useless without structure to actually follow through and put that into practice, and to, as you said earlier, John, reflect on how you're getting on, right? So the importance of personal time to reflect, to set structure within from where an organization or a team is and where it wants to go, that is like hugely, hugely important, right? And massively underrated. So strategy and structure is like the SAS. It is SAS, right? It's like super, right? Kind of like delivery to get this stuff done. And even when that happens, you're going to have different diverse people within that team. So if you take the DISC model that, we're aware of, hopefully people on here are, but just to refresh our memory on that, there are different personality types, right? There are things there around directive people who get stuff done. There are visionary people on the I. There are then people in the S, and then there are more analytical people in the C. Okay, so what that means is that even when it comes to delivering the strategy and then delivering that in a structure, should put the right people who have got the best diverse skill on like the different things they're going to take on. So for instance, the visionary North Star type stuff, that's where you want your yellows, you want your eyes kind of like being involved in that. Remember, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, this is what we want to achieve, right? On the other side of that, the strategy needs to be, ideally, you want to be using that diverse skill out of your more analytical people who've got more structure. Yeah. And as you do that, you need to make sure that you're engaging, you're actually getting stuff done. So the engagement, that's where your reds come in, your Ds, driving stuff collectively. And then you've got to manage the well-being of the team as you do that, manage through the change, make sure people are feeling included. So the well-being type initiatives, they're really where your greens come in, your S's come in. So strategy isn't just good on its own. It's great, it's interesting, but to actually get the rubber on the road, to get the performance, and not just to get the potential identified, but to get the performance, you've got to create the strategy. And even then, the structure, who drives different things, even that can make a massive difference.
Wow, there we go. Mr. Lee Smith, our resident experts, any closing words from you before we go on to Olympic week reflections?
I don't think so. I think Chris summed it up well there with his final piece. I don't think there's anything else to add other than that. I suppose actually one thing I will say, and it links into the second part actually, John. I listened to it talks about that focus on what you can do and controlling the controllables and being as prepared as possible. And what I've loved about some of the Olympics is the commentary outside of the performances. So in the swimming they had Rebecca Adlington, Mark Foster, and in the cycling they've just brought in Laura Kenny. And I don't know if you saw it. She was talking last night after the GB women won the sprint gold, brilliantly in there. And they talked about the equipment and saying how much of a difference does the equipment make, bringing the best bikes, bringing the best kit, bringing the best helmets and everything. And again, it's back to those marginal gains that Sir Dave Brailsford brought in, in the early days of British cycling in there. But she made a really good point in there of saying she talked about this with her husband, who obviously another fantastic cyclist. I think he's probably Britain's most decorated Olympian now, isn't he? And she said, we were talking about it, saying one thing that we both had in common was when we went to a performance, it was all about getting ourselves in the best possible shape, the best possible position mentally, and then we put on the suits and then we got on the bike. It wasn't about the bike and the suits and then we got on them. It was get us in the right place and then we'll use the equipment. And I thought it was a great point, again, bringing back to that business piece again of that focus on yourself and what you can do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lee. Resident expert, you've earned your wages this week from our enormous subscription fees that we're earning from this podcast. There's a chew it in the post to you. And yeah. Please stick around for the second half of the podcast where we start to get into Olympic faves, reflections, and I'm sure there'll be some comedy moments from the last week. Okay, welcome back. Right, straight into it. It's been a real mixed week. My first, and thank you, Lee, for that kind of closing comment around, the preparation of the athlete, etc. And then actually how that then adds to the whole context of that they're competing within their discipline and whether the apparatus, equipment they're using, etc. I think it's very true that whole preparation and mindset is so foundational, and you see, you can see that through the performances, through the weeks as they've built. One of my interesting reflections is the Olympics is a cruel game for some people. So certain sports, let's take tennis. So it's a series of elimination. The further you get along, the closer you get, and so you get to the final. And Novak Djokovic, he kind of knows he's either got a bronze or he's got a gold. And he's worked incredibly hard, and for someone who's such a decorated sportsman, incredibly grateful and proud of his achievements, which is fantastic. But then I was kind of reflecting. Then you look at I was watching the BMX bike racing, and there was a young lady, Beth Shriver, who was the main GB female entrant, and she absolutely nailed every single race in the run up to the final race, first every time. And then at the final, she's still up against, I think it was 8 other competitors, and she messed the start up, and she was 8th, so she walks away with nothing. But it's interesting, her interview afterwards, her whole psychology, and I guess it may be because it is more of an open game. Is like, I tried my best and I didn't get it, but yeah, it just psychologically to me sometimes, depending on the sport, the outcome's quite cruel for all those years of effort. In Beth's case, she'd worked so hard, she'd performed her absolute best in every single race, but it still wasn't enough to get her a medal.
I know. I thought her interview was brilliant, by the way, as well. Actually, I thought she did a fantastic interview afterwards. It was spot on. Sorry, Chris.
No, but that controlled the controllables, right? So I think that space in her head was definitely around, well, I did what I could do. I managed the things I could do. And then things happened that was out of my control, and I'll accept that. So the acceptance of that, but the mental fortitude to be able to cope with setbacks and to just stay really focused is like pretty amazing. I mean, if we flip over to, like the gold medal, the blue ribbon event, like the men's 100 meters, right? Before that, everybody's talking about the Jamaicans, and the Jamaicans are going to win, and they've been running the fastest times this year. And there's an American guy called Noah Lyles who has won races in the past, but he's never run as fast as the Jamaicans are running this year. And he's not the fastest, and he's been beaten in like semi-finals, in the heats, in like other stuff. But he still had the self-belief and the focus around what he would do. And then while they all scrap it out in lanes 3, 4, and 5, he just is smooth as like silk in like lane 6 and comes through and wins by 5,000ths of a second. It's just an amazing race where, it's not like in the times of Bolt, because like Bolt was just a phenomenon, right? But the fastest, that had the, I think, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th fastest finishes in those positions in history.
Yeah.
So it was collectively an amazing race, but it really struck me around that power of, what's up here, where are you, and what are you focused on, and controlling the controllables, managing your own mind, cutting out the noise. And it'll be really interesting to see how he gets on in his other 2 events. He's got the 200, which he's better at. So it'll be really fascinating. But again, that mental fortitude, just remarkable.
Really, isn't it? There was a brilliant, I don't know if you've seen it, and somebody shared it on, I think it was on LinkedIn actually, and it was a clip of I think it may have been an Australian athlete or a US athlete, and she was talking about it, about the sort of, the mental aspect there. So about, the Noah Lyles piece in there. I think I think every competitor in that final was under 10 seconds in the end, weren't they, for the first time ever. It was unreal. Whereas the person who finished 8th, if they'd have run probably the last 2 Olympics, they'd have probably taken gold with the times they got in there, which is phenomenal. But this lady was being interviewed, and she talked about how does she retain that sort of groundedness and mental capacity, where it's not the end of the world if she doesn't win, if she doesn't take the gold. And she talked really, really well about it, and saying, actually, one of the core things is, I want that gold medal. I don't need it. And I think that was a real differentiator in there.
Yeah.
Where you talk about, some people go in there and they need it. And you see that crush afterwards, that crashing afterwards, because it's immense for them, because they've built up their whole life for this. But finding that right balance between, you want it, but you don't absolutely need it, I think is critical. And again, links back into the business side of things as well. We all wanted those next steps up. We wanted that bigger pay. We wanted that next performance. We wanted that top rating. But some people need it a little too much, and that can be quite crushing in there at times as well. So it was a really good interview in there. But the moment for me, I think that, because again, there's so many when you look at it, isn't there? There's so many little bits you can pick out. But the bit that I really enjoyed was actually, I think it was yesterday, actually, or the day before. And there's been a load of noise about this, obviously, but it was Simone Biles competing yesterday in the beam and the floor final. And, the beam final, she fell off and then got back on again, finished her routine, retained that composure, if you like, in those difficult circumstances. And then in the floor final, came out the floor a couple of times, probably did as best as she could and did a fantastic performance again. But the Brazilian, Rebecca Andrade, I think her name was, won gold. And what I really liked about it was when, I don't know if you saw the medal presentation, when she was presented with the gold medal, the two Americans who were silver and bronze bowed down to her as she got up, because she'd been silver and bronze so many times behind Biles, behind the other American in the previous Olympics. And this was her chance almost to take that gold medal, and the pleasure that they took in her getting it was phenomenal in there. And it's they're individual sports, but they're still supporting each other to be the very best they all can be. I thought it was phenomenal in there. I think, Biles said afterwards it was Rebecca Andrade all the time that was always pushing her, always chasing her, always on her heels, that was probably making her even better all the time in there. But I thought that moment, there's a brilliant picture that was taken of that, and I thought that moment was perfect. And typically, the synchronization of the bowing from the two Americans was perfect. So I don't know whether they practiced that in the background as long with their beam routine. Immaculate.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think there's so many, I guess, the beauty of the Olympics is there's a lot you can learn from it, but it's great entertainment. My controversial point will be, so literally just before this recording our podcast, we had the TV on in the kitchen, and they were doing the free climbing, and the controversial point is actually how much of Olympics is entertainment versus pure athleticism. So the free climbing, there's an American guy just set a new world record. It was sub 5 seconds, and that's it. You're done, and when hats off to him. His drive and effort to get to it, but it's almost like you could blink and miss it. So, yeah, maybe the wall should be 10 times higher.
Make it at least 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Completely. They're unbelievable. Just on that piece as well, John, and this was the other bit I think I've loved the insight on from the conversation in the background. I think Mark Foster talked about this, particularly about the swimmers, where he says, we're seeing the pinnacle and the people at their very best in these sports, but what you don't see is the dark hours that go in behind all of this. They're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get to the pool. The parents getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take them to the pool or to take them to training. And it's that constant that's going on in the background all the time for those little bits that we see at the top. And I think, again, that it goes back to the work side of things again, of, people will see what your performance is at the top in the work environment and how you're doing. But you need to keep doing that work below the surface. You need to keep training and improving and focusing and getting the balance right of need versus want. But it's only that top level that people see.
Yeah, that support team structure is like hugely important. I mean, there'd be hardly anyone who's like performing at that level who's just purely based off of them. Like, no one's an island in terms of like peak performance. And it's really lovely when you see people like, hugging their families and who's helped and coached them around like the side. And there's that lady Keely who won the 800 meters for Great Britain last night. There's a video of her, and her mum and dad kind of like shouting, "Come on, Keely!" Like when she was like 8, running along. It's like years and years of dedication. I think that's the same for anyone in the corporate career, sole trader, whatever it is that to appreciate and to be really grateful for all of the unswerving support that we all get, us three on here, everybody who's like listening to this podcast. It can be really, you can get so wrapped up in the moment or the moments or the focus and the whatever it may be. Actually, we all do this stuff to enable us to do what's, to spend time with our loved ones and to do more. If it defines you, that's probably too far. Right, yeah, but it's really difficult. And controversially, John, I really like the climbing and the fact it's over in 5 seconds, and kayak cross, because that reminded me. I mean, that thing with the canoe, it was a bit like watching like canoeing Mario Kart in real life, where it's kind of whatever. I think I think that just teaches us that like what's in vogue and what changes, just different generations, and goodness knows. I mean, when skateboarding and other stuff got in there, it was like controversial at the time. Yeah, so I just think it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that climbing thing. Just saw, 4.75 world record apparently.
Yeah.
Didn't make me want to do it because it just fall off. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I like it, but I want it to be longer, higher, and more high risk, and then I think you've got a great spectacle. Double the height.
A bit like Kung Fu Panda with the swinging chains like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think that we've got a new career
Ninja
path
Warrior
coming
Gold,
on, Chris.
Like that. Ninja, right? Okay, all right. Okay, cool. Yeah, that can be the final bit of Ninja Warrior then.
Just one of the things that just sprung to mind actually, we're talking there, and this actually links back to the first part of the podcast when you're talking about the bigger part of the cheese, Chris. And I don't know if you saw did you see the mixed relay triathlon yesterday at all? And then we took bronze in the end. Unbelievable performance in all 4 that were in there. And it was a photo finish. So the American, I think
it was the US, wasn't it?
Was it US that pipped us, I think, to second in the end, wasn't it? Silver. I can't remember who took the gold now. Anyway, took the gold by maybe a metre or so. And then after all of that swimming, running, cycling, it came down to a photo finish between us and the US. And we were originally given silver. And then they re-looked at the photo finishes, and actually the Americans took it. And so they interviewed Alex G and the other team afterwards and said, got the silver, fantastic, brilliant. And then they got downgraded to a bronze, and they came back and said, how do you feel now? And he was like, well, exactly the same, fantastic. We've won a bronze medal. We did the best we could do. And back to the bigger part of the cheese piece, what really I thought was brilliant of him, he said, and what we've done is we've shown the world what mixed relay and triathlon is about. And we've presented a fantastic picture of the triathlon. So it wasn't about him, it wasn't about the team, it wasn't about the Olympics piece, it was about that bigger part of the cheese of the whole triathlon as a whole and what it can be. And I thought, again, and I think some of the interviews with the athletes have been phenomenal with the way their mindset is, both to win, but also that perspective that it brings as well.
Good. Well, thank you, chaps. I have loved the Olympic theme. Lee's been a gold star today from our special man of sporting knowledge. Yes, you've been watching Just About Managing podcast. He's Chris Dingle, he's Lee Smith, and I'm John Lloyd. Please listen to us, follow us on all platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. See you next episode.